UX designers? Lots, okay. Dev engineers? A couple, okay. So this is a good group of people. What I'm going to talk about is, not that. I'm going to take you through things that are very important for me that I've seen over the last few years. I'd say I've been in the business as a designer, and also at the very beginning of my career, also as a web developer, web designer. And over the last few years, I've become sort of a branding expert, you could say, an experienced designer. And I'm going to talk about what is important for design today on a high level. And I consider everyone that has these types of job titles as designers. We are designing experiences and we're designing things that transform people in the way that they interact, just like the examples that we saw. But to start off this talk, I'm going to talk about where I come from a little bit, because I think it's more important than what people think. There's always something that I say to all the people I've ever worked with on all levels, whether they be an intern or whether it be someone who's my business partner. I always say you have to draw on the experiences that you have had in your life to build amazing experiences for other people. Because that's the only way that you can connect with people, because you connect with the experiences that you've had in your own life, and that's what you build. So this is something that I always do and talk about. I mean, I had an employee who now has his own company here in Berlin, who's a digital agency, and I used to always tell him, like, you know, take on your experience of working at H&M in your student time to be able to pitch ideas better. He was a guy that was really good at selling things, and that actually helped him in develop his own business. And now his company, that started with 4 people, now has 20 people, because he was able to pitch ideas that may not necessarily been accepted by other people. So let's start about with this. And before I dive into like the 4 points that I think are important for all designers, I'm going to take you, as I said, to this story. There's a movie that was made in the 80s. It's called The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the 8th Dimension. Has anyone ever heard of this movie? Okay, a few people are shaking their head. It's a really strange movie about a bunch of bandits that travel through time in different dimensions, and they all have different disciplines, you could say. There's like cowboys, there's Indians, there's knights from the Middle Ages, and they're traveling around with the key figure who's from the present time. The present time is the 80s, obviously. And then at the end of the movie, they're sitting as a band, right? So they're a band, and you're like, well, what are all these people from these different backgrounds as a band? And then they're standing in this concert hall, and they say to this, or the lead man says to this woman in the background crying, and says, no matter where you go, there you are. And I think that's a profound statement in the sense about understanding where we come from. And so I'm going to start off with the 3 people that has influenced my life today, and what I have learned from them, and then how that is important for what we do as designers. And 3 is always a good number, whether it's Charlie's Angels, the tri-state area. I don't know if anyone's from the United States, but the tri-state area is this New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, the 3 Little Pigs, the Rule of Thirds, the Triple Crown, the Holy Trinity. But the 3 people that influenced my life are these 3 individuals. I don't know if you all know these people. My background is quite diverse. I haven't always been at agencies. I've also been on client side quite often. I've kind of gone back and forth over the last 20 years of working on client side, working for brands, or working as an agency or being an agency owner. But I started my career in California, as you saw that first picture in the beginning. I was born and raised in LA. I grew up around board sports and action sports and lifestyle. So connecting this experiences that I had to sort of physical activity was something that was very important for me. And these lifestyles led me to my first job. I don't know if you've ever seen this logo before that's down here, but this is Rusty Preisendorfer. Okay? Who is Rusty Preisendorfer, you might ask? Why is he significant? Rusty is a surfboard shaper. But in the 60s and 70s, surfing looked like this. Surfboards were gigantic pieces of wood, 60 pounds, huge, or let's say a good solid 30 kilos. And people surf like that. And becoming from California, by the way, I'm a skateboarder. I mean, I look like it today, but I didn't get along with surfers, right? That's a huge thing. In California, people always say, well, you know, skateboarders and surfers, they're the same thing. No, they're not where I come from. It's a complete opposite of what I believe in. I believe in concrete and urban, and they believe in waves and surfing. And that's not me. But anyways, back to Rusty. In the 70s, he started experimenting with epoxies, with foam, and different types of materials like carbon. And what was fascinating about what he did, and his passion and his innovation, he brought forth designs like this, the C5 design. And the C5 design basically launched the evolution of the sport. Because I said surfing was just really one big board with one skag with no actually innovation to the product itself. It kind of, if you've ever surfed before, it can be very wobbly, and when you get on a big board like that, it just kind of just stands there. But when you get on boards like this, when you advance in surfing, it actually channels the water and thrusts you through the water, and now surfing has turned into something like this. Surfing has transformed itself because these unexpected uses of materials and unexpected ideas of pushing the boundaries. And this is one thing that I've learned from Rusty. My next point in my career is I moved off to New York. New York was great because I had a new understanding about, you know, what it means as a communications expert, as a designer, as a person who builds experiences for people, because that is sort of the antithesis of experiential environment. You know, the whole thing, we go back to that idea, that picture that we just saw about in Berlin about the tickets buying. There's a certain thing, if you've ever lived in New York, when you go on the metro, right? The timing that you get with the card as you go through the turnstile in the subway is an experience that is I've never experienced anywhere getting onto the metro. It's very unique. And there's this one time when you've lived there for 3 or 4 years, and all of a sudden you think you have the rhythm, and all of a sudden you don't, and the feedback loop tells you can't get through. You think, oh shit, am I no longer a New Yorker? Like you question your own reality. Am I no longer a New Yorker? But then you do it again and you say, okay, no, I'm not a tourist. I can come back through the system. And this is that feedback loop and this experiences that you have in New York, something that's highly unique. I had the pleasure of working with this gentleman. His name is Marc Jacobs. Marc Jacobs is a profound American designer that actually pushed and challenged the status quo of American fashion, right? This might seem banal to all of us that are sitting in this room, like, why is he interesting? But he transformed himself into an icon by pushing ideas and boundaries of what fashion was in America. Of course, this is now trendy again. Everyone's wearing Tommy Hilfiger and all of these brands that were cool in the 90s, but now it's cool again, right? But what Marc did is he took this idea of what the status quo was in the conventions and became something that maybe not necessarily was expected out of the United States. And redefining what luxury and glamour means in a very quirky and funny way. So off-the-wall approach to design. That was sort of the first person in the United States that did it, besides maybe someone like Coco Chanel in the 30s. So he pushed the idea of what fashion means. And being an outsider was a key factor of who he was as a person. He was a Jewish boy from New York. And yet he made himself a name in fashion in a world that's necessarily coming from his world. And then today, I no longer work with this gentleman. Does anyone know who this person is? Has anyone seen him? Yes?
Come on.
Yes, Eric Spiegelman. Speaking about the BFLG, right? Eric, I came to know Eric about 7 years ago, and then I became his business partner. I am no longer with Aiden Spiegelman. I've actually decided to step out on my own for personal reasons. But nevertheless, I learned a lot from Eric over the last years. Eric is a world-renowned type designer, graphic designer, and also an information architect, as he considers himself. But Eric, actually what most people probably don't know, is Eric took the idea of design in the 70s and 80s and what he learned in London from agencies like Wolf Olins, And he took this idea of brand identity and consistency and system thinking, and thinking in the way of systematically building up brands and identities, visual identities, of course, and the visuals interfaces that he would build. But the idea of corporate identity was not necessarily here in Germany at the time. It was a drab sort of art. You know, design was something that was kind of only brought to people who created product design. Braun, Porsche, furniture design. And design from his art was not necessarily looked at as being a qualitative sort of approach to situations or tasks. But he changed that sense of identity, and things like this came out from Eric, right? He works on a higher level about exploring what the viewer will see or what the audience will see, helping them navigate through changing environments, but still giving a sense of clear guidance. The whole BVG, besides the actual automated tellers, actually comes from Eric. He thought this through, and he thought this through to a very good deal. Of course, this is with his other teams at Meta Design and before, not to say that it was only Eric, but this is how Eric has thought. And he changed what it means, the idea of design on a meta level, not just a graphic design, but a very strategic dimension of design. And this standardization has given business leaders in Germany and around the world much more power in how they communicate and how they actually transform what their brand means to their users or their audience. So, why did I start with all of that? Designing experiences is going beyond, let's say, community platforms, interfaces, and web presences. For me, designing experiences goes to the fact of where I come from and where I want to go. And this is important because that's what we want people to understand when we design experiences, where they come from and where they want to go, right? Leading them down a path to something that's fulfilling or positive for them in their experience. And I just wanted to start off with what I mean by yesterday, because yesterday, or even today, still there is a sense of working in silos and working not in a collaborative atmosphere. I still witness this today when I go to clients or I've been talking to companies, and I dive into these companies and try to figure out what their problems are. And a lot of times their problems are not necessarily that they don't have great people and they don't have the right ideas. It's just the fact that the collaboration is not there. That they still work in this type of situation. Black and white, top and down structures. This idea of like marketing and design and development, IT and sales, etc., they're all compartmentalized still. Even though in the startup world we've seen something different, but I've even stepped into big startups here in Berlin, and they still struggle with this idea. A friend of mine has an artificial intelligence company, and he still says that we fight with this. And I think this is interesting. We talk about the evolution of design and technology and collaboration on a higher level, but yet we still live in this world because we all know this is what the world looks like. Every one of us in this room, and even the people that live out there, know it's non-linear. Know that it's a fluid environment. There is no clear lines of communication or interaction or experience because it can easily be distracted or turned off. And so the world is confusing, and that's why I really like this picture. This is a picture for me, is like the classic Renaissance idea. Renaissance changed how we interacted with one another, not just because, okay, there was an introduction of coffee and the people were no longer drunk every day because they used to only drink beer, and now they could drink coffee and have a conversation on an interesting level. But the point being is that they had this idea of bringing people with many disciplines together and sitting down on the table and discussing what is the future of what we're going to be doing. And this is important. And why does this need to happen, and why does this change need to happen? Because as we all know, especially for us in this room, is that we are increasingly battling the abundance of information, the abundance of experiences and products right now. Right? This is something that's happening. People are becoming confused because they have so many opportunities and so many options. There's always something new, and then they turn it off and they come to the next thing and they're, oh, I don't like that app anymore, this was no longer good or whatever. But this is something that is the best and the most important thing as designers, because we're searching to attract and activate the people that we come in contact with. So we're literally battling for every piece of real estate in someone's mind. That is literally our job. And that's a fascinating but also very competitive situation. I'm not putting this up there because I come from California, but one thing that I think is quite profound from Walt Disney himself, and I'll give you a bit of a side story. When Walt Disney actually launched Disneyland, his people who actually helped him create these environments and create these experiences actually built 10 rules for Disneyland. Basically 10 UX points for the future of experiences when customers come in there. And something, if you've probably ever been to Disneyland, you probably don't really realize it, but when I was a kid and I first went to Disneyland, when you walk into Disneyland, you come to this Main Street thing, right? And you look down the street and there's this castle at the end. And you're like, wow, this castle is gigantic. Holy cow, this thing is huge, right? You come back 25 years later and you walk into Disneyland and you go, same situation, you stand there and you go, holy cow, that thing is tiny, right? That's what you think. But if you actually realize what they did, the angle of the street and actually the bridge coming into the castle at the end is created a particular angle that children see that as being an enormous object. But when you come over that perspective, it's no longer a larger object. They constructed an environment particularly for these people in 1950. That's pretty genius if you really think about it. They really knew who they're talking to. They knew their audience in 1950. So this idea of understanding who our audience is nothing new. It's been used for the last 60 years and even manipulated, look further back. So really an experience doesn't come from a particular logo or an app or visual expression or insights. It comes from the combinations of all these things and how the people experience that. So no matter where you go, there you are, right? And that is an important factor. So as I see that there's 4 things for me that I have learned, and maybe this is nothing new to all of you in this room, but 4 things for me that I find to be highly important for designers on all levels, and I consider as myself designers in this room on all levels. And these are the things that I'm trying to focus. I'm going to show a few examples. Some is from my last company, and where I think that they do a good example of showcasing what these 4 things are, or these 4 focus areas. But designers need to focus on creating truly amazing and inspiring experiences like Disneyland. And that is what we need to go through. And what I think, and if I draw from Disneyland, these are also the 4 things that are reflected in Disneyland. And the first one is content, right? We all know that content is important, but providing customers an easy access to gain more information and a big picture idea is actually hypercritical for this. It gives them a chance to actually see the importance and what is the importance of the idea. Walt Disney himself actually focused on the idea of content. That is actually what he produced. He created content-driven experiences. This is a buzzword that we hear, but it is actually true what he did. And they guide them through these experiences. One project that I was part of, or that I was not directly part of but my agency, was for Red Bull. This was a global image campaign called Give You Wings. There's 2 aspects to Red Bull that we have to probably understand. There's one, the cartoon world, which is the classic advertisement that you see on TV with these funny little cartoons, right? And then there's this athlete world. And just so you know, in the Red Bull world, the cartoons is for the mass market, the athlete world is for their particular audience, their core audience that they try to push. But they don't necessarily push that globally on TV, right? Or on the classic mass level. But what we developed with the brand team in Fushel was a content made to share, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to bring people into a world and guide them down a path to give them the idea of what really Red Bull is about, exactly like Disneyland. guide people down a path so they go, aha, one-to-one back to where I came from, I understand the whole story. I see a big picture. And so, for example, in this case, we would start with this sort of a global campaign that we may have in a TV spot, but then you would dive into sort of the world of Red Bull. In the world of Red Bull would either tease an athlete or an artist or anyone that they deemed special and fit the Red Bull world. And then they would then take people through the different levels of telling stories through their different platforms, guiding them through deeper and deeper stories to obviously landing where they would want them to be to actually truly experience that particular person who they deem part of the Red Bull family, right? Okay, this is nothing that's necessarily new, but what actually is fascinating about a brand like Red Bull is they nail it. Most brands don't nail it. They do a blog post or a campaign and then it's broken and it doesn't work anymore. Or they never bring you to the end. But they would say, here for example, these are our musicians that we love. You can have a brief overview. Oh, and by the way, if you really want to know who they might have played with or where they're at or what they're doing right now, you can go on redbull.com. Yeah. Redbull.com. Oh, and by the way, here, they are actually part of our culture program, the Red Bull Music Academy. So they connect you through these different experiences. They lead you down a path for you to understand what really matters to the users. My second thing, which is context. I think context is a critical point for all of us, and I think we all understand that. But UX design, we need to actually define the interaction patterns best suited for the context. I think this is a hypercritical moment, and this is exactly a little bit like what the Red Bull story is and or Walt Disney. In the sense that the choice is affected by context, right? We know that. Choice is affected through the context that we have. So tailored interactions to personal taste become hypercritical in the situation. There's one example that I found in New York. It's an actually retail shop concept. It's called Story, right? And which I think is interesting about this is it is a woman who said, you know what? Normally when I see inspiring things, it's happening in a magazine. But then I have to search all around for where that thing is. I have to go online, I have to go offline, I have to go walk to the store, I have to go there. But then this sort of curated, let's say, magazine inspiration is no longer there in front of me. I have to find it somehow. And so she said, you know what, we're going to bring these stories, because that's usually what it's called in an editorial format, especially in the fashion world. They bring these storylines or these stylizations to an actual physical shop. But then they used all of the different other contextual area ideas to actually guide people to this thing, to give them new interactive events and actually both combine this digital and physical. And so she actually come up with this idea that it's a permanent pop-up shop. And so it's ever-changing, living magazine and content, but also all in the context. So I know what I'm finding, but I also know that maybe that what's coming up the next month or the next 2 months is not what I'm interested in, but it might be interested in someone else. So framing those ideas and giving the people the understanding of a greater purpose is important, but also guiding people along and making sure that they're feeling that they're in this world and they understand what that world is highly important. The third thing is what I would call convenience. We can call it personalization, but I call it convenience. I think designers need to be able to enable customers to interact. We all know this. We saw that with the first example. But features of information that we design should be important to the user, right? So what really is important for me? We all talk about improving the experiences. And one thing that we did at Spiegelman is when Site Magazine or Site Magazine Online came to us, one thing that they were having, or one thing they were noticing from their users is they would have long articles, but the bounce rate was extremely high. But that's obviously because the style of journalistic quality was so on a level that people would have to read long articles. But they also wanted to funnel people into small snippet information, but they didn't know how to do it. So what we helped them do is actually create what we call cards, right? We all know this idea about cards, right? This is nothing new or inventive, but the thing is, in a editorial context, there was not too many people doing this idea. giving small little tastes about information so people can understand and or dive deeper into a particular topic. So we produced this product that actually enabled these small little interactions with inside a particular article, right? So if I'm scrolling through an article, but I don't have time to read the whole thing, I can quickly get my overview and the facts and the details, but I also can, share it and hold on to it for later, right? This swipe right, swipe left idea. But nevertheless, it still was a highly effective product for them because it actually appealed to the users that would read their particular magazine. Because not all the time when I'm sitting on the subway do I have a chance to read the whole entire article, but I definitely want to see what's going on because I'm interested in the topic. So giving the user quick, relevant topics, but also what matters to them the most, the top line information, become critical. This was an idea of convenience. It was an effective usage of the idea of convenience. And the last idea is another one that's not from me, and this is consistency. Maintaining consistency in a system is highly important. Standardization is even more critical because the standardization can come in the form of visual, it can come in the form of content, it can come in the form of sort of micro, small little interactions or even convenience. But these consistencies become the overall feeling for an interaction and also an experience, coming back to this idea of a large level of experience. I'm sure anyone from Berlin knows what this place is. Does anyone not know this place?
It's in Berlin.
Exactly. Exactly. In 2004, Berghain opened. If anyone is from Berlin or knows Berlin, I haven't lived here that long, I've only been here for 10 years. But I do know the histories of Berghain as Ostgut, as also E-Werk and Tresor in the 90s, right? These are all the clubs that actually became something that drives a music scene, that drives an experience. And Berghain, for me, is this antithesis of consistency, right? It is the antithesis of true consistency. It has been what it has been since 2004. And there is no denying it. If you go there or you never get in, you actually know that it's consistent, that either I get in or I do not, and that is that simple. Access is denied. But it's an obvious system without a system. But the patterns that are created in this unexpected manner actually creates this feeling of what it is. It is unparalleled in that sense. There are no VIP rooms. There are no mirrors in the bathroom. I wonder why. There are no expensive cocktails. There's only one thing that really, when you go there, and that is the most amazing sound system that you will ever experience in your life. But to get there, you have to go through this guy, right? And this guy, Sven, may not let you in, but that actually creates the whole experience in itself. Do I get in and can I listen to this beautiful sound system, or can I not? How do I get in? I don't know. Am I right or am I wrong? But this is actually, these question marks and these uncertainties actually creates the sense of consistency. Because you know this is what's going to happen. So in your mind, you are programmed, something might happen, but I don't know what it is, but it could be good, but it could be bad for me that night, right? It is an amazingly consistent experience. And that is the most important thing when we build experiences. It doesn't have to be like Berghain. You can allow accessibility. You can allow people to come in. You can give them the opportunities, right? That's not the question. But how they do it has to be thought through from start to finish. Mirrors to VIP room to amazing sound system. And it goes beyond just a digital experience. It goes through everything that you do. And this is the thing that I have learned over the last years, because now we've come into this increasingly situation where we either are building products or experiences or brands that save attention, right? Which is today's scarcest resource. Attention that you save, saving time, maximizing utility, and streamlining interactions, or you're seizing it.